This is me on my third day without sleep, traveling across the world to get to my coffee. And this is me later that day after crashing. If that's ever happened to you, where caffeine helps for a bit and then you crash hard later, then this video's for you. To understand how to use caffeine in your daily routine, you first must understand how it actually works. Caffeine works mainly by blocking adenosine, which builds up throughout the day and helps you feel sleepy. When caffeine blocks it, you feel more alert, more motivated, and more awake. But, and this is the important part, the adenosine doesn't disappear. It's more like caffeine is temporarily taking the place of adenosine until the caffeine eventually disappears. At that point, the adenosine comes back and you feel tired again. This is why caffeine can feel great for a few hours and then you feel tired again. The tiredness was always there. You just couldn't feel it. But there are ways around this. And in this video, I'm gonna give you 6 ways that I manage my caffeine input and get better output as a result. The first tip is to drink slower. The reason behind this is simple. The faster you intake caffeine, the more intense the spike is. A huge hit of caffeine all at once can make you feel jittery instead of focused. Drinking slower also helps prevent crashes and overstimulation. So how should you do this? You want to aim to finish your drink in about 30 minutes. And there are a couple ways that you can do this. The first one is to use a Yeti like this. What a Yeti or any temperature controlled thermos allows is that you can keep your drink at temperature for longer, so it doesn't get watered down fast. And this brings me to my second point, which is choosing hot drinks. Because you can't drink a hot drink as fast as you drink an iced one, it forces you to slowly sip on your drink. The last point to try to drink slower is to make your coffee taste a little worse. And I know most people don't want to do this, but if your coffee contains 2 sugars and 2 creams and a pump of vanilla, then it's going to be hard to sip it slowly. Versus if you just put milk in your coffee, or even drink it black, it's going to be much easier to spread it over a longer duration. The next tip is to signal coffee for focused work sessions. Coffee, like any stimulant, only amplifies what you're already doing. So if you're distracted by using your phone, then coffee isn't going to achieve what you want it to achieve. Instead, use coffee as a cue to get you in the right mindset to work. A good example is Pavlov's dogs. Every time they heard a bell, they expected food. So eventually, the bell alone triggered a response. If every time you drink coffee, you work hard, then the coffee itself becomes a cue for hard work. So how do you do this? One strategy that I use is to create a productivity routine. So for example, it can be first I make a cup of coffee, then I clear my desk, then I put my phone in another room, and then I start working. Going even further, another method is to pair the caffeine with a specific task. For example, before you make the coffee or open the energy drink, you say, this coffee is to be used for this specific task, like a specific essay or a specific project. It's also important to remember to always stick to your routine, or at least as best as you can. When you pair caffeine with deep work, your brain treats it as a signal that it's time to lock in, and you are becoming just like Pavlov's dogs. The next tip I have is surrounded around caffeine timing. You've probably heard from your mother, brother, grandmother, sister, and dog that caffeine too late is bad for you. And this is true. Caffeine's half-life can range from about 2 hours to 12 hours depending on the person, which means that half the caffeine may still be in your body hours after you've drank it. But there are practical limitations to stopping caffeine very early. So here's how I recommend you do it. The strategy that I use is a cutoff time. Based on the time that you go to bed, set a certain time where you stop drinking caffeine. And what time this is depends on a few factors. First is the amount of caffeine you have late in the day. Recent studies have found that 100 milligrams of caffeine, which is roughly a cup of coffee, taken 4 hours before bed, did not significantly disrupt sleep. On the other hand, 400 milligrams of caffeine taken 4 hours before sleep significantly affected the quality and onset of sleep. If you tend to drink less caffeine in the afternoon hours, your cutoff time can be later than if you tend to drink more. A good rule of thumb is to stop caffeine about 5 hours before you go to bed. So if you go to bed at 11 p.m., try stopping at 6 p.m. But remember, people respond differently to caffeine. So test yourself, either subjectively or through using something like an Apple Watch, and figure out how the caffeine actually affects your sleep. If you're sleeping well, you can try pushing your cutoff time later. The next important tip is to avoid crashes. A crash is mostly caused by adenosine reappearing. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, which might make you feel more alert, but it doesn't remove the adenosine from the body. As the caffeine wears off, your brain might fog up. You might feel tired or have low energy. As a quick note, a caffeine crash usually occurs later in the day and is a result of sleep debt, versus feeling tired after a meal is usually caused by a rise and then a crash in your blood sugar, which is a separate issue. So how can you avoid a caffeine crash? Here are some tips that I have done myself. First of all is split the dose. Like the earlier tip, spreading out your caffeine will help you prevent a crash. So for example, instead of having 200 milligrams of caffeine at 8 a.m., you can try to have 100 milligrams of caffeine at 8 a.m., and then 50 at 10 a.m., and then 50 at 11 a.m. The next tip is to avoid caffeine immediately after waking up. The science behind it is simple as well. In the morning, your body naturally removes the adenosine from your system as you wake up. Taking caffeine too early interferes with this system and prevents your body from displacing the adenosine that it normally would. So I like to wait about an hour after waking up before I have any caffeine. Okay, but if you're in a situation where you've had a few nights of bad sleep and you think you might crash later on, here's a tip that I use to help prevent that. What you don't want to do is to try to use more caffeine to help prevent the crash. That usually doesn't go well. Instead, try moving around. You can go for a quick walk, you can perform 10 minutes of stretches, or even go to the gym. The next tip that I have is to make sure that you choose the right drink. Different drinks have different caffeine contents and can be used for different purposes. You want to choose a drink that allows you to focus on the task at hand. Now, for me, that's normally coffee. The reason I like coffee is because it has enough caffeine to help me stay focused without getting jittery. If you're someone who prefers energy drinks and prefers the higher caffeine content in those drinks, then that can work as well. But just remember that a lot of energy drinks also have other stimulants like taurine and also have artificial sweeteners or sugar. What I've found is that when I drink energy drinks, my heart rate goes up, as well as my anxiety. If you're someone like me who feels almost overstimulated when I drink energy drinks, then choosing coffee might be better for you. The last part that I want to mention is to track, measure, and adapt. A lot of times, and I'm not exempt to this as well, people try to copy someone else's routine without figuring out how it impacts their body. People are different, and the way that their body handles and processes caffeine differs significantly. If you're someone who is very sensitive to caffeine, then you may want to set your cutoff time earlier than someone who is less sensitive. If drinking coffee or caffeine on an empty stomach hurts you, then it may be worthwhile to have some food before you ingest caffeine. If you're very sensitive to changes in your blood sugar, then black coffee or coffee without a lot of additional additives may be more beneficial for you. It all depends on your goals and what you're trying to achieve. What you should do is try to mimic other people's routines, but measure the way that it affects you and then adapt accordingly. Doing this, you can use caffeine as a tool to help you actually reach your goals. And that's it. Hopefully this video has been helpful, and hopefully you can implement some of these tips within your routine to help you get more out of caffeine and out of coffee.